He was a retired special ops soldier hiding from a past that nearly broke him. She was a brilliant CEO running for her life after uncovering a secret powerful enough to destroy a nation. And the moment Natalie Cross stumbled into Ethan Cole's small mechanic shop, bleeding, frightened, and begging for help, both of their lives changed forever. Because when a ruthless tech mogul sent mercenaries to silence her, they didn't just come for Natalie. They came for Ethan's 8-year-old daughter, too. And that was the moment Ethan stopped being a mechanic and became the monster they should have feared. This is the story of one impossible day, a day of bullets, betrayal, and a love born in the middle of fire. Before we begin, if you enjoy emotional stories about love, courage, and healing in the darkest moments, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. Your support helps us bring more powerful stories like this to life. Now, take a deep breath, because this story starts fast and it doesn't let go. The day the calm ended, Ethan Cole was under a truck, grease on his forearms and the radio on low. The shop smelled like oil and old leather, and the kind of quiet that had become a habit. He liked the quiet the way other people liked coffee. Necessary, stabilizing, just enough to start the workday. It gave him space to breathe without planning for the next crisis. He'd built that life on purpose. A cracked sign that read Cole's Auto, a single bay with a stubborn fan overhead, a little desk by the window with crayons scattered on it, where his daughter drew tiny suns and truck cabs. Lily, 8 years old, fierce with a laugh that made people softer, was his compass. She moved through the shop like she owned every inch of it, hopping onto a crate to reach a shelf, carefully pretending to hand him the wrong wrench because it made him laugh. He'd taught her small things: how to hold a flashlight so the beam stayed steady, how to check tire pressure, how to tie 2 knots that would hold if you tied them in a storm. Those lessons were simple, mundane, and sacred in the way they kept the world whole. They were also the reason Ethan refused to leave. He had walked away from a life where men vanished without notice, where orders came without paperwork, and people disappeared with the efficiency of cheap smoke. He left because Lily's lips needed to be close to his at bedtime, because a bakery on Main Street made a cinnamon roll that made them both grin, and because the world outside his town had a way of taking things away. He wanted to keep what he loved small and real and stubbornly protected. So, when a sleek black car hissed on gravel and skidded to a halt outside the shop, dust raising a thin veil that danced in the late afternoon sun, Ethan felt the old muscle memory in his shoulders, the one that read the wrong signal before he even had a conscious thought. He popped out from under the truck, wiped his hands on a rag, and straightened to see what the town had brought him. A woman stumbled out of the car, clutching something to her chest like a talisman, a leather folder, scuffed and heavy. She was breathless, hair loose around her face, eyes sliding across the street with a predator's quick palpation. Not panic, purposeful fear, the kind people carry when they know someone is hunting them and they don't have anywhere to hide. When her glance met his, she hesitated, as if trying to decide whether opening the shop door would be opening a lifeline or a trap. She didn't know anyone in Millersville. She didn't know Cole's Auto. She only knew the map on her phone had decided, for some reason she couldn't explain, to route her there. Fate, luck, or the kind of coincidence that people later call signs. "Please," she said, in a voice threaded with exhaustion. "I need help." He noticed her posture, not a beggar's slump, but a soldier's break. It made sense. People who were used to fighting didn't fall apart in the street. They made choices and then made a plan. His eyes flicked to Lily at the little desk by the window, color-streaked thumbprints on paper. The child looked up and smiled a bright, unfiltered hello at the stranger. The woman's face changed. She softened the way people did when a child revealed the world still carried good small things. She took one step closer to the shop's threshold and then stopped, as if afraid of what that movement would trigger. "Are you hurt?" Ethan asked. "No," she managed. "I think my car. I don't know if it's sabotage or a fuse, but I'm not here for that. I just need somewhere to sit for a minute, maybe use a phone. He recognized the language. People with trouble didn't always ask for help with the problem. They asked for time, for a momentary harbor. He nodded once. Come inside. Keep your hands in sight. Don't slam the door. She blinked, surprised by his insistence on small safety protocols. Thank you. Her name came out with her first full breath. Natalie Cross. He felt the name brush past him. He'd heard it before in the half-light of news cycles. A woman at the head of a company that made protective systems and clean networks. A figure in magazines where people wrote about new technology like it was sacred text. The folder in her hands looked heavy with more than paper. The way she held it made it clear whatever was in there was not for casual hands. It might be the thing that turned her life into a run. They brought her into the office, and Lily slid from her chair to meet her at the door, regal and small. Hi, I'm Lily. Do you like my drawing? The child's trust was blunt and generous. It landed in Natalie's eyes and tugged the tension at the corners. Natalie's reply was a wavering line of relief. It's beautiful, Lily. A minute later, the problem presented itself outside in the shape of a black SUV. Tires crunched, and someone tapped the door handle. Then the heavy thuds, someone using metal on the garage door to push, probing for a way in. The rhythm of the first 3 knocks was purposeful. The predator wasn't patient. Ethan moved between his small family and the door like a hinge. Go to the back room, he instructed Lily. Stay where I can see you and don't speak unless I tell you to. Lily obeyed without a question. She knew the tone. She had listened to him many times when his voice held that same quiet steel. It was the same voice he used when he taught her to make the knots hold. What do you want me to do? Natalie asked. Stay behind the desk and don't let anyone see you. She glanced at the little girl and something softened in her face, a fissure that let in human warmth. I'm sorry, she said, voice small. I didn't mean to drag this into your life. Ethan didn't answer with kindness or apology. He answered with what he always answered with, action. He moved to the heavy box where he kept tools for emergencies, the ones that didn't get used in weekends, but in times when a man needed to make silence obey him. He wedged a bar under the manual lever for the garage door, just in case someone tried to yank it. He checked the locks. He assessed exit paths. The mind that planned for days of danger worked fast at boiling threats down to their simplest solutions. The door handle clicked. The intruders were impatient. Hurried footsteps followed by the scuff of boots. The garage door shuddered against Ethan's improvised brace. They weren't trying to sneak in like thieves. They were pushing like people who intended to make a point. Who are they? Natalie breathed. Men who don't take no for an answer. He didn't say more because there wasn't time for speculation. There was only time to keep his daughter alive and keep the woman behind him breathing. The panel above rattled, and then the door spat light, a narrow wedge that made long, angry shapes across the office floor. A fist reached under and shoved. Ethan swore softly and kicked the bar further into place. Metal screeched, then a sound like a ragged animal, a shout muffled by distance, the language of command with no courtesy. When the door cracked wide enough, Boots stepped in. 2 men, tactical, steely eyes. One of them smacked the flash of a phone, sending light into the shop. The other pulled a radio and spoke in clipped bursts. The predator voice had no personal inflection. It belonged to men who took orders and obeyed them completely. Natalie didn't flinch at the sight of armed men. That, more than the whole spectacle, told Ethan what kind of danger followed her. If she had been startled, she might have been a target. If she had been panicked, she might have been careless. The way she steadied, the way she hugged the folder to her chest, that was the posture of someone used to standing under pressure. It told her she was dangerous in a way he respected. Open up, the taller of the 2 called. We know she's in there. Ethan tilted his head. You're wrong. Boots came closer, cracking tile with synchronized steps. One of them reached toward the counter in a movement meant to intimidate. Ethan moved as if the room was his native geometry. He kicked the counter, sending a cascade of little things into the air. A wrench clattered under the table, metal ringing. He used the noise to his advantage.
Lily ducked further into a nook, small and silent. The man staggered a step, eyes flicking, expecting ambush. He found only a child and a mechanic's hands that smelled of oil and decisive intent. Natalie froze, then acted. Her hand slipped inside the folder and produced a phone. She lifted it in a way that was both defiant and desperate. "You don't want to do this," she said. "They'll see. They'll trace it back to you." The man laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You think we care about traces? We care about making sure you don't speak to anyone." Ethan's mouth formed a line. He bent and took a heavy bolt from the floor, weight steady in his palm. It was not a weapon he wanted to use, but he had learned long ago that tools were decisions. He could decide to hurt someone to protect his family. He would. Outside, a second SUV rolled up and parked behind the first. More boots hit the gravel. The driver's windows were up, but the men didn't bother to hide their intent any longer. The hunt had stopped being subtle. Natalie watched Ethan with a complexity in her eyes he'd never seen on the news photos. Gratitude braided with guilt and fear. "If they get in," she started. "They won't." His voice didn't tremble. He loved that about himself sometimes and hated it other times. The part of him that didn't flinch in the face of violence was the same part that taught him how to make decisions that left gray scars on the world. There was a pause, and then a shudder of motion. One of the intruders faked a step back, which drew Ethan's attention. It was the oldest trick in the book: create a staged retreat, invite a bite, punish the bite. Ethan moved before they realized he had the plan. He shoved a crate across the counter, a makeshift shield, and leapt, using the sudden shift of posture to destabilize the man who created the feint. He slammed shoulder first into the intruder's chest, knocking breath out of him and buying a breath's worth of time. The other man cursed and lunged. Ethan twisted, using a motion
conjured by years of training that had nothing to do with tools and everything to do with instinct. He took the man's arm, redirected it, and then, because the situation allowed no finesse beyond blunt efficacy, he slammed the butt of the bolt into the man's thigh. The man crumpled, cursing, and the radio fell from his hand to clatter uselessly on the floor. The shop was a storm of clattering metal and surprised voices. Natalie crouched beside the counter, as if caught somewhere between being a target and being a participant. In another life, she would have been the hand who pulled strings. Now she kept her face down and breathed with Lily's small frame wedged between them, like a sentinel of tenderness in a rough world. Then, and Ethan always remembered this moment as the one that would mark the rest of his life in a thin, bright line, there was the sound of a different engine in the street, faster, controlled. It pulled into view and stopped. A man stepped out in a neat suit, not tactical, not rough. Clean shoes, clean hair, but there was an aura of casual authority about him that made the men at the garage straighten like officers at attention. He smiled as if he belonged to a different weather system. "Ms. Cross," he said, with a kind of warmth that had teeth. "You didn't expect me to find you." Natalie's lips tightened. The man's presence felt like a slug of ice down the spine. The intruders outside shifted, glancing to him for direction. He was the hand that could call the operation. Ethan felt the world tilt at that presence. There was recognition in the air, a quiet that suggested this man was the reason the others existed. He walked toward the shop door like a man walking his garden. "Leave her," Ethan said. It was a simple order. It was mostly for show. He didn't pretend he would win against an entire coordinated force, but he had learned to prefer to make sure anyone who touched his family learned something about cost. The man smiled, and the smile was not friendly. "I'm not a monster, Mr. Cole. I'm an employer looking for answers. Ms. Cross has something that belongs to people with consequences." At the word consequences, Ethan knew he had stepped into a larger net. Someone with access to that vocabulary was not improvising. Someone with calm at the edges of their demeanor had resources he could only guess at. "Take her and go," Ethan said again, more quietly. His hands were steady. If push came to shove, he could end this sentence with a fist or a plan. One of those was more irreversible than the other. The man's eyes flicked to the little girl by the window. "You're dangerous," he said to Ethan. "You're reckless. You carry others into danger under the guise of protection." Ethan could have answered with rage. He could have explained what a father does when the world arrives wanting to take his child. But the man didn't want explanation. He wanted compliance. Natalie moved then, an almost involuntary step toward the intruders, like a person walking into a flare of pain on purpose. She placed herself between the men and Lily in a way that made Ethan's breath catch for an entirely new reason. "Take me," she said. "Take me instead." For a second, he thought she might hand herself over to make his child safe. Then he realized she wasn't offering sacrifice so much as negotiation. She was buying time. She was doing the cruel mathematics of human traffic and deciding that one life could be bartered for many. "No," he said, and his voice broke into something human and immediate. "You don't get to decide that." The suited man laughed softly, not cruelly, but with a patience that made Ethan's skin tighten. "Such drama. You're both stubborn." He took a slow step forward, hand open in a non-threatening shape. "Ms. Cross, you've made a choice by harboring that drive. Let's not make this messy." Before either of them can finish the sentence, the quieter intruder raised his weapon. Metal glinted. The man by the SUV barked a sound into his radio. The garage held its breath like a lung waiting for an exhale to split it apart. Ethan's response was immediate because he didn't have time for deliberation. He grabbed Lily's small hand, sweeping her into his arms in a movement that shaped all the promises he'd ever made into a single, solid thing. "Go," he said to Natalie, voice urgent. She hesitated for a fraction and then ran. She moved through the side door toward an alley he'd already scouted for escape routes. For a breath, the world opened a dangerous gap. She slipped through the door and vanished into the scrape of the streetlight. Ethan turned the other way, ready to close and burn the bridge behind them. The suited man's eyes caught his in a glance that promised a future reckoning. "You'll regret this," he said. It was not a threat. It was a forecast. Men like that offered forecasts that came true. Ethan didn't reply. He wrapped Lily tighter and moved for the back exit himself. They did not make it. A car peeled out of the dark with a speed that spoke of trained drivers and a map. It cut the alley corner and slammed to a halt. The men from the SUV poured out, surgical and coordinated. Natalie had to fall into an ugly choice: run, climb, hide, and somehow she found the wrong option. A hand clapped over Ethan's mouth from across the yard, rough and practiced, the smell of smoke and money on the cuff. He didn't gasp. He didn't struggle like a man thinking only of himself. He thought for Lily. He used the moment to throw the man off balance, using the surprise of a small fight to shove the attacker into a trough. It gave Natalie a half-second too many. But the half-second was a currency measured in breaths. In one, Natalie slipped beneath a chain link and sprinted, sneakers slipping on gravel. In the next, a rat's movement, a flash of someone darker than the other men, caught her shoulder and dragged her down. She screamed, short and shocked, a sound that cut the air like a breaking piece of glass. Ethan felt the cold grip on his jaw, then a second hand clasped his shoulder. Someone was talking rapid, low words in another language. The employer, the man with the calm smile, watched with a coolness that would be at home in a courtroom. He gestured, and the world narrowed to a single, terrible focus. He wanted Natalie, and he wanted silence. Ethan's training took over in a rhythm none of his town friends would recognize. He twisted, rolled, and slammed his shoulder into his captor. A flash of speed, a grunt, a scramble. He kicked back, dirt in his face, and then felt the world tilt again as the man he'd hit brought a baton down across his ribs. Pain flared. He tasted metal. And then he heard Lily's voice, small, clear. "Daddy!" Ethan's vision tunneled. Men shuffled. A radio squealed. The suited man barked orders. "Secure them both. Hold the kid. Don't kill her. Use her." The phrase landed like a stone in Ethan's chest. Use her, transactional, collected, a threat dressed up in strategy. It was the kind of language vicious men used when they were not going for violence, but for control. They would trade, they would bargain, and they considered people to be lines in a ledger. The hands tightened. He moved anyway, because that was what operators did: move under pressure, find angles, make a path where one did not exist. He lurched forward and slammed the man over the nearest dumpster, freeing a single arm for a desperate reach. He shoved at his face, then twisted and lunged at the chain link where Natalie had been dragged. The mesh scraped his palms. He dug fingernails into metal and felt the sting like a prayer. He saw Natalie pinned, breathing fast, her folder torn from her grasp on the ground, papers fanning like wounded birds. A figure loomed by her with the shape he'd seen, a man who wore the kind of history Ethan recognized with the ache of loss: Daniel Price. Ethan's heart lodged. That name was a ghost that had once been a friend, a brother in arms, whose laughter had filled the quiet hours. Daniel looked at him with a flat, unreadable face, not quite hatred, but something that resembled it. Recognition passed across his features, a flicker like steel striking stone. For a sliver of their old history blinked between them: missions, nights under hard moons, the cost they'd both once paid. Then the man behind Daniel barked a command, and a practical silence fell back like a curtain. They took Natalie first. They lifted her and bundled her like a crate onto the back seat of the black car. Daniel climbed in like a man who'd never been surprised by cruelty. The suited man stepped in last, closing the door softly as if closing a book. They watched Ethan for a moment, a gaze like a line drawn, and then they drove away. The SUV's taillights swallowed them like a pair of coy lanterns beating a slow path into the night. Ethan slumped to his knees in the alley with dirt under his nails and fear sitting on his bones. Lily's small hands were inside his own, soft and hot, squeezing like an anchor. He drew her close and smelled the fabric of her hair, tasted cedar gum and fried bread. He breathed her in as if to memorize the scent. They had Natalie. They had the folder. The threat had become a fact. The world he'd kept narrow and safe had folded out into teeth. Ethan rose slowly, spine a column of tension and resolve. He knew the score. He could feel the pivot of this night in the way a man stands and puts one foot in front of the other toward a fight. He gathered Lily and pocketed a scrap of the torn paper from the folder at his feet, a breadcrumb, a piece of something that would become all the way to the end. He held it like a talisman. The night drew
close around him. Somewhere beyond the sound of his breathing, the suited man's car was already on the highway, carrying Natalie Cross into the dark. A plan had been activated. A transaction had been set into motion. Men in neat suits thought in terms of papers and ledgers. They would be surprised when a mechanic and his daughter became the storm on their trail. Ethan looked at the little girl in his arms. Her eyes were red-rimmed and huge. "You okay, kiddo?" he whispered, voice rough. She nodded, burying her face back into the fabric of his shirt. "We're going to get her back," he said aloud, and the sentence was not a promise so much as a map. The collision had happened. The quiet had vanished. The rest of the night folded into motion. Phone calls to people he wasn't supposed to talk to, a check of the barn's old radio, a list of names he'd hoped never to use again. The folder's torn paper would be the first step of the trail he would follow. He sat on the curb and let the small town's lights gallop on, making the asphalt a river of small fires. They had a name now, and names were things you could hunt if you knew how. Ethan shut his eyes, breathed, and for the first time in a long time, let the part of him that he'd buried come up and kneel beside his daughter. He would not let them use her as leverage. He would not let her leave this night without an unfinished life. The work had begun. Ethan drove without speaking.
hands locked around the steering wheel, knuckles pale under the dashboard glow. The highway ahead was empty, dark except for the yellow blur of streetlights smearing across the windshield. Each passing stripe hummed beneath the tires like the world was ticking down to something he couldn't see yet. And in the rearview mirror, Lily sat curled up in her hoodie, face still wet from tears she wasn't letting fall anymore. Her silence hurt him more than any bruise on his body. She hugged her stuffed rabbit, staring at the smear of night outside. Every few seconds, her eyes flicked to the empty seat beside her where Natalie had been not long ago, where she had smiled at Lily, brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear, told her she made beautiful drawings. Now she was gone, and Lily's small voice cut through the thick air. "Daddy?" Ethan swallowed. "Yeah? Is she hurting right now?" His chest tightened like someone had tied wire around his ribs. Ethan had spent most of his life knowing how to ignore pain, but Lily's fear, that he could never ignore. His voice came out softer than he felt. "I don't know, baby, but I'm going to find her." Lily didn't move for a moment. Then she whispered, "I don't want her to be alone." Ethan's grip tightened again. Neither did he. He reached back and brushed her cheek with his thumb. "She won't be alone, not while we're breathing." Lily nodded, but he didn't miss the tremble in her small shoulders. The burner phone buzzed against the console. A location. Warehouse district. Confirmed ping. Ethan didn't hesitate. He turned the truck sharply, tires skidding along the empty road, and the town began to thin behind them. Houses faded to storefronts. Storefronts faded to old rail yards and factories left behind by better decades. He drove into the motherless silence of steel, rust, and long shadows. When he reached the final turn, he killed the headlights and rolled the truck to a quiet stop behind a row of crumbling concrete blocks. He stepped out slowly, and the cold slammed into him like a delayed punch. The smell of metal and old rain hung thick in the air. He leaned down to Lily's window. "You stay here," he said. Her little hands tightened around the rabbit. "Be careful," she whispered. He nodded but didn't speak. He couldn't trust his voice not to break. Ethan shut the door quietly, and then he disappeared into the night. His footsteps didn't crunch. His breath didn't fog. He moved like absence itself, the way he had been trained to move in places where being seen was death. He pressed his body into the wall of the warehouse and listened. Voices. Low. Confident. Too relaxed for people who deserve to breathe. "Got her in the south wing. Hale wants confirmation once the files are uploaded. Price says to hold her until the truck's ready." The second name carved itself into Ethan's mind like a blade. Daniel Price. There was no way Daniel was here, aligned with Hale, collecting money to hunt whistleblowers like they were game animals. The Daniel he knew had been sharp, competitive, loyal. They'd saved each other's lives more times than he could count. But that was years ago. People changed. Pain changed them faster. Ethan's chest throbbed once like a pulse of grief, then hardened into something cold. He pressed deeper into the shadows until he found a window with a broken pane near the top corner. He hoisted himself up silently and peered inside, and saw her, Natalie. She sat on a metal chair, wrists zip-tied in front of her, hair damp from sweat or tears he couldn't tell. But she wasn't broken. Her shoulders were stiff with defiance, her jaw set with something like fury wrapped in fear. A man shoved a paper in front of her. "Explain this," he snarled, jabbing a finger at the code printed on the page. "I hope your boss chokes on it," Natalie spat back. Ethan couldn't hear clearly through the glass, but he saw her expression, the mix of terror and bravery, the refusal to bow even when surrounded. It stirred something violent and protective in him. He had seen hard men cower in the face of death. Natalie Cross stood straighter in its shadow. Then Hale walked in. Victor Hale. Everything about him felt wrong, too polished, too calm.
His steps were slow, thoughtful. The room seemed to stiffen around him. He smiled as if this entire warehouse was a boardroom and the tied woman in front of him was simply a difficult employee. "Natalie," Hale sighed, "you've really complicated things." She stared up at him with frost in her eyes. "You're selling surveillance access to foreign buyers. I wasn't going to keep quiet." "You weren't supposed to find it. Or at least you were supposed to bring it to me privately." "And let you bury it?" she scoffed. "You don't get to decide who gets watched." "That is exactly what I get to decide." He glanced toward a device on the table, a black tablet displaying lines of captured data. "And after tonight," he murmured, "it won't matter who knows." Ethan's pulse spiked. He slid down from the window. He had seen enough. He scoured the perimeter, counting guards, checking entry points, watching their rotations. The old instinct took over, designing the rescue like solving a puzzle someone had set with cruel intentions. He slipped through a side door and past a stack of crates, rolling behind a forklift. A faint metallic sound echoed nearby, the click of a safety being switched off. He froze, listening. When the guard walked past, Ethan moved behind him and struck hard. The man hit the ground before he understood he was dead weight. Ethan dragged him behind barrels and pressed forward, senses tuned to every change in air pressure, every footstep. He reached the main corridor just as two guards were walking toward him, chatting casually. Ethan ducked behind a pillar. "Boss says Price has taken her to Hale's cabin afterwards." "Better her than me," the other snorted. Ethan stepped out, slammed one guard's head into the concrete, and swept the legs out from under the other. Before the man could scream, he pressed a forearm into his throat and choked him out cold. He didn't feel guilt. He felt clarity. He moved deeper until he stood behind the final door separating him from the room where Hale was interrogating Natalie. He steadied his breath. 1, 2, 3. He burst through the door. The room exploded into chaos. Ethan moved faster than shock could register. He shoved one guard into a desk, grabbed another by the collar, slammed him into the floor, and snapped his weapon free. Hale stumbled back, his eyes widening. Natalie gasped, a small, sharp breath of relief and disbelief. "Ethan," she whispered, voice breaking. He moved toward her, but a voice stopped him cold. "Well," someone drawled, "didn't expect to see you here, Cole." Ethan turned sharply. Daniel Price stepped into view. The same face, same gait, same dead calm eyes, but the warmth he remembered was gone. Daniel held a knife lazily at his side, like this was a sparring match from their past. Ethan felt his rage scrape the back of his throat. "You're working for Hale?" Daniel shrugged. "Man pays well. World's changing. Adapt or get left behind. You used to have a conscience." Daniel chuckled. "Conscience doesn't buy houses. You're hunting of Civilin." "Not hunting," Daniel corrected, lifting the knife. "Cleaning up loose ends." Ethan lunged. Their bodies collided with a force that rattled metal tables. The knife slid across Ethan's arm, slicing cloth and skin, warm blood spreading instantly. Ethan slammed Daniel back, landing a solid punch to his jaw. Daniel grunted, retaliating with a knee to Ethan's stomach. Their fight was fast, brutal, intimate. Two men who had once watched each other's backs, now aiming for arteries and bones. Daniel swung. Ethan blocked. Ethan elbowed. Daniel ducked. They crashed into shelves and tore down cables, sparks flashing across the floor. "You don't have to do this," Ethan growled. "Yes," Daniel snarled, eyes blazing. "I do." "I won't let you hurt her." Daniel's lip curled. "Then you'll die for her." That sentence ripped something loose inside Ethan. He grabbed Daniel by the collar, slammed him onto the ground, and struck him twice, hard enough to rattle the concrete. Daniel snarled and scrambled up. "This is who you are, Cole. Always has." "No," Ethan breathed. "This is who you made me." He hit Daniel so hard, the man slumped to the floor, dazed but breathing. Natalie let out a soft, broken sound, something between fear and gratitude. Hale tried to slip out, but Ethan grabbed him by the jacket. "You're not going anywhere." Hale's voice trembled for the first time. "You have no idea what you're interfering with." "I don't care." Bullets cracked through the windows as reinforcements arrived, glass raining into the room. Ethan grabbed Natalie and shielded her with his body, pulling her toward the exit. "Move," he ordered. She stumbled beside him, breath ragged. "Ethan," she whispered. "Run." They sprinted through the smoke-filled corridor, ducking behind crates as bullets shredded the metal around them. Natalie's wrists were still bound. She tripped once, nearly falling, but Ethan caught her instantly, lifting her back to her feet without missing a step. "You came," she whispered shakily. "I told you I would." "Why?" she breathed. He didn't answer, not because he didn't know the answer,
but because he feared the answer would burn everything around them. He shoved open the side door and pulled her into the cold again. Lily saw them first. "Daddy! Natalie!" she cried, voice cracking. Natalie froze, then sprinted to the truck with Ethan, collapsing into the back seat with Lily in her arms. Ethan jumped in, slammed the door, and tore out of the parking lot with bullets chasing their tail. Natalie held Lily tightly, pressing kisses into the girl's hair, tears dripping onto her cheeks. Ethan's throat tightened at the sight. Lily clung to Natalie like she'd always belonged there. The drive to the cabin felt like hours, even though it was less than 20 minutes. The forest loomed dark and protective as they wound through the dirt path that only Ethan and one other person knew. When they arrived, Natalie practically collapsed from adrenaline. Ethan cut her bindings with a pocket knife, and she whimpered softly as circulation flooded back into her wrists. He cupped her hand gently, inspecting the red marks. "You're safe now," he said softly. Natalie looked up at him. "I was never safe," she whispered, "until you grabbed my hand." Lily leaned against Natalie's side, buried in her warmth like she had never doubted Natalie would return. Ethan's chest ached, not in fear, but something quieter, something dangerous, something like longing. Natalie wiped a tear from Lily's cheek. "You were so brave." "You too," Lily whispered. Ethan had to look away. Later, when Lily finally slept tucked between blankets on the cabin's couch, Natalie sat at the wooden table with a blanket around her shoulders and her hair hanging damp around her face. "Ethan," she said softly, "I have to tell you why Hale wants me dead." He sat across from her, hands clasped, eyes steady. She explained everything. The exploit, the secret back door, the way Hale wanted to control every device in the country, the foreign buyers, the black funds, the attempted cover-up, the board betrayal, the smear campaign. Ethan didn't interrupt. Not once. When she finished, her voice broke. "I didn't want to run to your shop. My car rerouted on its own. I still don't know how." "Someone wanted you safe," Ethan murmured. She looked at him, something fragile in her eyes. "You didn't know me, but you protected me anyway. You risked everything." He leaned closer. "I'd protect you again." Her breath trembled. The door opened. Mason stepped in, tall, weary, sharp-eyed. He nodded at Ethan, then looked at Natalie. "Long night," he said simply. Natalie exhaled shakily. "Longer than you know." Mason spread the maps on the table. "We go after Hale at dawn, hit his main server facility, expose everything." Natalie looked terrified and determined all at once. "And Price?" asked Ethan. Mason met his gaze. "He'll come. He won't let Hale fall without a fight." Natalie reached for Ethan's hand before she could stop herself. "Please don't kill him," she whispered. Ethan held her hand gently, rubbing his thumb over her knuckles. "I'll do what I have to keep you alive, to keep Lily safe." Her lip trembled. "I know." "Do you trust me?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she breathed. More than I've trusted anyone in years. Ethan squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. Outside, dawn crept across the horizon. Inside, their fingers remained intertwined as if letting go would mean losing something they had barely begun to understand. And tomorrow, they would walk into hell together, side by side. The forest around the cabin held its breath as dawn rose, thin streaks of watery gold sliding behind the tall pines. The air felt charged, like the world knew what was coming long before Ethan said the words out loud. "We move in 30 minutes. He stood at the window, jaw clenched, staring at the map Mason had spread across the old wooden table. Natalie sat on the couch with Lily nestled against her, holding the little girl as if she were something far more fragile and precious than code or evidence or the company she'd once run. Natalie looked tired, hollow-eyed, hair still tangled from being dragged through concrete corridors, but she was steady. There was a new kind of resolve in her posture. She wasn't running anymore. She was choosing to stay in the fire beside Ethan. He felt her eyes on him before he turned. "Ethan," she said softly, "you don't have to do this alone." His gaze met hers, and though he didn't speak, the meaning was clear. "I'm not alone. You're here." Mason checked his watch. "We hit the facility at shift change. Security will be swapping teams, less coordination, but Hale will expect something. This won't be clean." "When was anything ever clean?" Ethan muttered. Lily sat up sleepily, rubbing her eyes. "Daddy?" Ethan crouched in front of her, hands on her shoulders. "You're staying here with Mason today." "No." Her voice cracked immediately. "I want to stay with you." "You can't," Ethan said gently. "It's dangerous." Natalie leaned in. "Lily, sweetheart, we're going to fix everything today, and when we come back, it'll all be over." Lily searched Natalie's face. "You promise?" Natalie swallowed hard. "I promise." Ethan watched that exchange, something tight and aching twisting inside him. The way Natalie looked at Lily, like she'd hold the sky together if it meant keeping her safe, made him feel something he never allowed himself to feel. Hope. He pulled Lily into a hug. "Be brave for me, Starfish." "I will," she whispered into his shoulder. When she pulled back, tears sparkled in her eyes. "Daddy, don't get hurt." He brushed her cheek. "I'll do everything I can." Natalie watched that moment, heart squeezing in ways she didn't expect. To see the tenderness Ethan carried, how fiercely he loved, how carefully he held the small world he'd built, made something fragile and powerful crack open inside her. She stood, walked to him, and placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Come back to us," she whispered. "Us." The word hit him like a heartbeat in the dark. He nodded once. "Let's end this." The server facility rose like a fortress on the edge of the industrial district, stark metal beams, tinted windows, and a lattice of antennas on the roof transmitting a network of encrypted greed into the sky. Ethan studied the building from the shade of an abandoned lot opposite it. Workers in dull uniforms filed in and out through separate doors. Drones circled overhead. Security cameras pivoted in clinical sweeps. Mason exhaled. "This place is a nest." Natalie shuddered. "Hale keeps everything here, every illegal exploit, every back door he built. Then it burns today," Ethan said. They moved quickly. Ethan guided Natalie and Mason along the blind spot routes between cameras. He knew how to read surveillance patterns like weather, knew how to feel the rhythm of guard shifts. A truck rolled past with a loading crew. Ethan grabs Natalie's hand. "Now." They slipped behind the truck and ducked into a side entry before the automated doors slid shut. Inside, fluorescent lights cast sterile shadows across long gray hallways. Machines whirred. Servers blinked with coded pulses. It felt like walking into Hale's bloodstream. Mason hacked the first panel in seconds. "Straight ahead," he murmured. "Main hub is 3 floors up." Natalie stayed close to Ethan, body brushing his arm when they made tight turns. Her breath was quick, but she didn't hesitate. He noticed the way her fingers grazed his back occasionally, not enough to distract, just enough to say, "I'm here. I'm with you." They reached the stairwell. Ethan froze. Voices. heavy steps descending. He pulled Natalie into the shadow of the wall just as 2 guards marched down, rifles swinging. One guard stopped, sniffed the air. Thought I heard something. Ethan pressed Natalie closer, shielding her with his entire body. He felt her heartbeat crash against his chest. Her hand gripped a fistful of his shirt, trembling. For a moment, the guards continued down. Ethan didn't move until their steps disappeared. Natalie exhaled shakily. "Thank you." He didn't speak, but the look he gave her told her everything. "I'll always protect you." The main hub was enormous, a warehouse-sized room with server towers, cables braided like muscle, and a raised platform at the center where Hale's private system was mounted. 3 guards patrolled the area. Hale's personal logo flickered on a massive wall screen. Mason whispered, "I'll breach the firewall if you 2 can keep them off my back." Ethan nodded. They slipped inside. The first guard never saw Ethan coming. A swift strike behind the neck sent him crumpling silently to the floor. The second guard turned. Natalie stepped forward, surprising herself even, and swung a metal rod she had grabbed from a nearby cart. It connected with the guard's wrist, sending his weapon skidding. Ethan finished him. "Nice," Mason muttered. Natalie's breath shook. "I can't believe I just—" "You did great," Ethan said. The third guard spotted them, yelled into a comm, and sprinted towards the stairs. Ethan threw a knife, pinning the man's sleeve to the wall long enough for Mason to disable him, but the comm alert had been sent. An alarm blared. Red lights flashed. Natalie's heart jumped into her throat. "They know we're here." "Then we move fast," Ethan said. Mason's fingers tore across the keyboard. "I'm in, uploading everything Hale's been hiding." Natalie watched the data stream across the screens. Years of illegal logs, private recordings, financial transactions, hacked communication lines. Everything Hale built unraveling in seconds. Mason exhaled. 60%? 70? The doors on the far side of the room burst open. Daniel Price entered with a squad of armed contractors. Natalie gasped. Ethan stepped forward. Daniel smirked. "You brought her right to us. Should have just stayed out of this, Cole." "Let her go," Ethan growled. Daniel shrugged. "Can't. Orders." Ethan charged. Gunfire erupted. Natalie dove behind a server rack, covering her head as bullets sparked off the metal. Ethan moved like lightning, rolling, returning fire, striking 2 men down before they even registered his movement. Daniel didn't shoot immediately. He wanted the fight personal. He tossed aside his rifle and grabbed a combat knife. "Come on, Ethan. One last dance." Ethan met him halfway. Their collision rattled the entire room. Daniel's blade sliced Ethan's shoulder, blood blooming instantly. Ethan grunted, reacting faster than the pain, elbowing Daniel across the jaw, slamming him backward into a steel column. Daniel wiped the blood from his mouth. "Still think you're the hero?" "Never said I was, just better than you." They tore at each other, punches cracking ribs, boots scraping against metal flooring. Daniel swung the knife again, grazing Ethan's ribs. The pain was sharp, hot, but Ethan didn't falter. Natalie watched breathlessly from behind the server tower, fists pressed to her mouth. Every time Daniel landed a strike, it felt like something inside her tore. "Ethan," she whispered. He stumbled, catching himself on a rail, breath heaving. Daniel pressed his advantage, tackling him into a power unit. Sparks burst. Ethan cried out, clutching his bleeding side. Natalie screamed, "Ethan!" Daniel raised the knife. Ethan caught his wrist, muscles shaking, eyes blazing with the refusal to die here, to leave Lily alone, to leave Natalie unprotected. "Ethan, move!" Mason yelled. With every ounce of strength left, Ethan twisted Daniel's wrist until the knife dropped. Then he headbutted him, slamming Daniel flat on his back. Daniel lay there panting. "You won," he muttered. Ethan stood over him, chest heaving, bleeding heavily. He aimed the fallen weapon at Daniel, but hesitated. Daniel smirked weakly. "Still soft. Still human," Ethan said. He turned away. Daniel didn't. He lunged for another weapon. Natalie screamed a warning. Ethan spun and fired. Daniel slumped. Wounded, not dead, but out of the fight. Natalie's knees hit the floor in relief. Mason yelled, "Upload complete." A large screen flashed, data transmitted to global watchdog networks. Sirens flared, backup alarms screamed, the facility began lockdown, and then Victor Hale himself appeared in the upper control deck, staring down at them with a murderous expression. "You idiots! You think leaking my system will stop me? It already did!" Natalie shouted back. Hale reached for a switch. Mason's eyes widened. He's triggering a purge sequence. The whole server floor is going to fry. Ethan grabbed Natalie's wrist. "We're leaving, now." They sprinted toward the exit as flames burst from overheated towers. Cables snapped. The floor shook. Ethan shielded Natalie as debris rained. They burst into the stairwell, running down flights as alarms blared in every direction. A metal beam fell, crashing across the stairs and striking Ethan's side as he pushed Natalie out of the way. He hissed, staggering. Natalie grabbed him. "Ethan, your shoulder." "I'm fine," he lied through shaking teeth. They reached the bottom level and burst through the emergency doors just as the entire facility blew in a cascade of sparks and fire behind them. The shock wave knocked Natalie off balance. Ethan caught her. But then his knees buckled. "Ethan!" Natalie grabbed him, lowering him slowly to the ground. His shirt was soaked crimson. Blood dripped from his elbow, his ribs, his shoulder. Too much. She cupped his face with trembling hands, tears spilling. "Stay with me. Do you hear me? Stay with me." He blinked slowly, pulling in a ragged breath. "I'm okay." "No, you're not," she cried. "Ethan, look at me. Look at me." His eyes fluttered open, focusing on her. "Are you hurt?" he whispered. She let out a broken laugh through tears. "No, you pushed me out of the way." "Good. That's good." Stop talking like that," she said, voice cracking. "You can't." She pressed her forehead to his. "You can't leave me. You can't leave Lily." His hands lifted weakly, brushing her cheek. "You're both safe," he murmured. Natalie broke. She kissed his forehead, his cheek, anywhere she could reach through her trembling. "We need you. I need you." He held her gaze, tired but burning with something real. "I'm not going anywhere," Ethan said softly. "Not until I know you're both okay." Natalie's tears fell faster. He pushed himself up with a pained groan. Natalie helped him stand, her arm wrapped tightly around his waist. Together, limping, they made their way back to the truck hidden in the trees. When they reached the cabin, Lily burst out the door, eyes wide in terror. "Daddy!" She ran to him, arms around his legs. Ethan winced, but pulled her close. "Hey, Starfish. You're bleeding." "I've had worse," he whispered, kissing her hair. Natalie steadied him as they stepped inside. Lily grabbed Natalie's hand. "Please help him." Natalie cupped Lily's cheek. "I will." Mason began patching Ethan's wounds. Natalie knelt beside him, holding his hand like it was the thing anchoring her to the earth. "You scared me," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, really looked, seeing everything she had faced, the fear, the courage, the vulnerability she had tried so hard to hide. "You fought like hell," he said softly. "So did you." Their eyes locked. Everything around them, Mason's muttering, Lily's sniffles, the soft creak of the cabin, faded. Only them, their breaths, their trembling hands, the fire inside them that refused to die. Natalie leaned closer. Ethan caught her wrist gently. "Natalie." She shook her head, tears spilling again.
I thought I was going to lose you." "You didn't," he whispered. And then the world snapped into place. She threw her arms around him, pulling him into a fierce, desperate embrace. Ethan held her back with one arm, the other gripping her waist, pulling her as close as he could through the pain. It wasn't a gentle hug. It was two people who survived fire, clinging to each other like oxygen. Lily climbed onto his other side and wrapped her arms around both adults. Natalie laughed through tears. "We're all here. All three of us. We made it." Ethan's voice cracked. "Yeah, we did." Then Natalie leaned back, cupped his face in both hands, and kissed him. Not softly, not shyly. It was raw, grateful, powerful, the kind of kiss that comes after almost losing the person your soul had already chosen. Ethan kissed her back, swallowing her tremble, her relief, her gratitude, her fear. When they finally broke apart, foreheads pressed together, Natalie whispered, "You're ours now." Lily nodded firmly. "Yeah, you're ours." Ethan exhaled shakily, pulling them both tighter into his arms. For the first time in years, he let himself believe he wasn't alone anymore. And neither were they.
And just like that, the silence after the storm felt louder than the fight itself. The servers were gone. The danger was gone. Victor Hale's empire was nothing but smoke and wires, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole allowed himself to breathe. Not because the world was suddenly safe, but because, for the first time, he wasn't carrying it alone. Natalie stayed. Lily held both of their hands like she already knew they belonged together, and somewhere between the fear, the fire, and the falling apart, they found a family they never expected. A soldier who stopped running, a woman who refused to break, a little girl who held them together through it all. Some stories end quietly, some end in flames, but the best ones end with people finding each other exactly when they need it most. Thank you for joining us for this journey. If this story touched your heart or made your day a little warmer, don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with someone who loves emotional, cinematic storytelling. Until next time, this is Between Raindrops Stories, where every storm finds its home.